Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Ron Burke, CEO of the Alliance for Water Efficiency. We're so glad you were able to join us today as we will be discussing the new AWWA G480-20 Standard, critical elements of effective water efficiency programs. Next slide, please. I think you're all pretty familiar with the webinar rules, but I'll just go over them real quickly. This will be 60 minutes in length. We plan to have time for questions at the end. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. We'd love to see your questions there, as well as near the end of the presentation. Audio is through your telephone or your computer microphone. Please keep your line muted during the presentation because we are recording the webinar. And again, questions can be typed throughout the webinar in the chat and answered by speakers at the end of the presentation. I'm hoping many of you on this call, maybe all, are members of the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And if you're not already, please consider joining our network of water efficiency experts. Our mission is to promote the efficient and sustainable use of water. We do have over 530 members across North America. We provide training, research, and other resources for water efficiency professionals, and you can learn more about who we are and what membership means at the link on this slide, allianceforwaterefficiency.org/membership. We have an amazing panel of presenters today. Peter Mayer. I'm not going to read their titles, so you can see those yourself. We have Peter, Veronica Bleddy, Bill Christensen, and Brad Spilka. Peter with Water Demand Management, Veronica with US EPA Water Sense Program. Bill and Brad are both my colleagues at the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So again, today's webinar is going to provide an overview of this new G480 standard. It will introduce the second edition of the standard and the significant changes therein. We'll be providing some examples from utilities, explaining how a voluntary standard can be useful, reviewing the history of the leaderboard and the verification process that AWWA leads. And we'll also cover updates to the leaderboard and compliance verification, how that happens. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Mayer, who will give us a little more detail about the new G480-20 standard.
Well, thanks very much, Ron. Hello to everybody out there in Zoom land. We're having a great day, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to be here talking about the G480. So the first thing we wanted to let everybody know about this standard is that it actually is a product that can be purchased from AWWA. If you're a member, it costs $55. If you're not a member, it costs $79. It is a sort of a pamphlet-y type of a book with 9 pages. And it also can be downloaded as a PDF. So we encourage everyone to actually go ahead and get yourself a copy of the real standards you actually have the document. We will not be presenting everything that's in the standard today. Next slide, please. So what are these G series standards? These are actually ANSI accredited standards. So they meet minimum requirements and they are reviewed by ANSI. But they set up these minimum requirements for utilities. And they are established particularly for management and operations. So rather than specifying, let's say, particular water quality levels in very precise ways, the G series are established to create a set of performance standards that would help utilities to improve their overall operations and service. What's unique about them is that they're completely voluntary. So a community can choose to adopt them or not. Once they are adopted, then there's really no enforcement either. So it's something that you sort of hold yourself up to this standard, and then you try to make sure the utility can follow that and maintain that. So let's go to the next slide. So why do people actually want to use these G series standards? Well, it establishes a sort of a benchmark or a reference point for top performing programs. And also a way to think about continuous improvement. So have we achieved all the points in this standard or not? Are we only in partial compliance? Is there anything we can do better? It's an important catalyst for conversation and for presentations to leadership so that they have an understanding of where the utility is in comparison with established benchmarks. And some examples of the type of standards that are included in the G series, there are many, by the way. There's distribution systems operation and management, communications and customer relations, reclaimed water operation and management, potable reuse program operation and management, and of course, water conservation program operation and management, which is what we're talking about today. Let's go to the next slide. So why did we develop this standard for water conservation programs? Well, we first started it. It was first published actually in 2013, but the team that put the first standard together started their work probably in 2010, actually. I think it took about that long to go through the entire process. And our goal was really to create a set of benchmarks for water utility conservation programs. And we wanted them to be fundamental benchmarks, things like metering, as benchmarking as that, and then moving up from there. And so we wanted to make sure that we were delineating all of the components that would be required for an effective utility conservation program. And so one of the things we wanted to have happen is the enabling of the type of verification that is the Alliance for Water Efficiency is actually doing. And you're going to hear more about that, where utilities can actually submit their program materials and have an independent assessment of whether they are compliant. That was one of the things that we hoped for. We knew that AWWA didn't offer that, but if we're able to create this voluntary standard, then perhaps another organization like the Alliance would be able to. And so based on the success that we've had with the first edition, we moved on to working on the second edition. Let's get to the next slide then. So the second edition, there you see the first edition and the second edition, what they look like. The first one was published in 2013. The second one we actually began working on in 2018. There's a 5-year review period. And so in 2025, we will look again at reviewing this standard. And so we changed the title a little bit to acknowledge efficiency as well as conservation. But the basic structure of the standard has been maintained. And as Veronica is going to walk you through some of the specific changes and requirements that have been added and modified. Let's go to the next slide. So why do you use this thing? So it establishes these consistent expectations for a conservation program. If you're outside of the organization, if you're a ratepayer or a regulator, it's a way of providing some assurance that your water conservation is in fact up to snuff. It gives a set of benchmarks. So if you're putting a new program together, you could determine whether it's part of the G480 or it's beyond what the G480 says. It's a basis for evaluating, is this program meeting even any of the minimum adequate standards? It really is a benchmarking tool. And I think it offers utilities a path for program development and improvement because they can look and see where they are and think about where they might like. Next slide then. So a lot of people helped to make this standard and create this standard. And only a couple of us are presenting today, myself and Veronica, but I really want to acknowledge the full team. We were led by Chris Brown, who took on the task of leading the group through the very tortuous AWWA standards process. And then Mike Gutner from the City of Bend was critical. And all the other people on the list, including Bill Christensen, really worked on this. And this is a completely volunteer effort, as most things are. And with that, I am pleased to hand the presentation over to Veronica Bloody from US EPA, who I would also like to point out is the winner of the AWWA Water Star Award. So over to you, Veronica.
Thanks, Peter. So yes, hello everybody. I have the fun task of taking you all on a tour of the standard itself. A couple of things to be on the lookout for as we go through it. The lightning bolt image will denote where we've added a requirement or significantly changed something that was in the first version. And the toolbox image highlights some of the resources that are out there if you need help in figuring out how to approach an element. So let's go. Next slide, please. So in addition to the normal boilerplate language that you'd find at the beginning of a standard, there's a list of definitions for terms that are used in the standard. And there are then the 4 main sections that are covered here on the slide. And to be clear, you'll see the blue box at the top. There is an overarching requirement, expectation that the utility is meeting the regulatory requirements that apply to it. But the key sections are the top-level organizational functions, which are providing a supportive environment for a program, the internal utility actions, external policy requirements, and wholesale agency requirements. And we'll talk more in detail about things under each of these sections. Go to the next slide. So you can't have a program if you don't have anybody working on it. And we know there are some utilities that might have one person who's doing everything, and some might have 50 people or more doing the work. The standard does not suggest a target staffing number, but it does ask that there be at least one person who is a dedicated point of contact. So it asks that you identify that dedicated coordinator and provide some description of the roles that they fulfill. With respect to documenting, the utility needs to share a job description, which may or may not include some of the things listed on the slide. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see a few examples of some of the utilities that have been assessed by AWWA. So the City of Sacramento at the top and the City of Guelph, Ontario on the bottom. And if you look at the descriptions there of the positions for their water conservation coordinator, you'll see there are some similarities and there are some differences. But basically, you're going to want to be able to show the scope of the person's work. And in the next slide, there's a lot more information about more detailed listing of the types of essential functions that could fall within a staff person's position description. The standard doesn't require that a person or utility does all of the things that are listed on the slide, but it does show you the sort of scope of what the position can entail. And it's a big job. I think once you start writing it all down, you realize that it is quite a span of control that the water conservation coordinator can have in the utility. Go to the next slide. So the main job of that person is probably going to be about developing and implementing a plan. And so water conservation planning is like one of the top things we have in the standard, because basically if you want to go somewhere, you need to have a map. And if you want to accomplish great things, you need to have a plan. So the plan should address all types of customers, the residential customers, the commercial customers, industrial customers, and include performance goals and benchmarks to track progress for working with each of them. The expectation is that the utility will be implementing the plan, not just putting it on a shelf. So they'll be monitoring their efforts and reporting out on their progress to their management and or their public. And the plan should explain how they're going to be able to do that going forward. And here on the right, you can see the cover of the new conservation plan from the City of Flagstaff, which was another one of the AWWA Leaderboard members. If you go to the next slide, we also wanted to make sure that the utility is including conservation as when it's developing a long-term supply plan, so that they're considering water made available through conservation as a source of supply. And you can see in the graphic at the bottom, which is from the Austin Integrated Water Management Plan, that they did include conservation when they were developing a set of scenarios to determine what kind of portfolio of water supplies they'd be looking for in the future. And you can see it's the green in this bar, because I don't expect some of you can read all the different text at the bottom, but the green is the water conservation. And you can see in each of the 7 scenarios here that it is a pretty big chunk of most of them. So conservation can be important in getting to water supplies. For this version of the standard, we also called out the need that the utility have a drought or water shortage plan. We know that water conservation programs are often called upon to step up their efforts during a drought, like right now in most of the West, but we wanted to make sure that those plans did exist at the utility level. So there is a requirement that they have a drought or water shortage plan in place. Next slide. So I mentioned tools, and there are many tools that a utility can help them in their planning arena. Several of these have been developed by AWWA, the most important of which is the M52 Manual on Water Conservation Program Planning. That just recently came out a couple of years ago. Actually, we'll be starting the work to update that in the next year or so. Also, the M60 Drought Preparedness and Response Manual that came out in 2019, and then the Water Resources Planning M50 Manual. Also includes mention of water conservation as a source of supply. The water conservation tracking tool that AWE has available can also be really valuable in assessing different programmatic features that a utility might include in a plan. So you'd be able to run your own scenarios and see what type of a mix of a program will get you what kind of savings. And of course, we always include it through sort of like a Bible of water conservation is the Amy Vickers book on water use and conservation. So those are the types of resources available to you. We can go to the next slide. So now we come to public information and education. And because so much of the success of conservation efforts depends on actions the public takes, it's really important that a utility have a public information education program. The messaging that you might have might be different depending on your size of your system or your location within the country. And it may include regional collaboration where utilities are closely located, like in the greater Phoenix area or in parts of California. But the goal should be to get customers to, as they say in California, make water conservation a way of life. And that's by fostering a culture of conservation and efficiency. The standard calls out key components that a program should include, and they're listed here. You know, communicating not just conservation, but the why. We'll talk about the value of water, the sources of water, how it's treated, how it's delivered, providing information on how people can reduce their consumption, being consistent about delivering and making sure those messages are getting out to people, and then promoting the use and maintenance of water efficient products, practices, and services to all customers. Next slide. And again, there are a lot of resources that can help utilities on their education efforts. Many of them are prepackaged, so you don't have to do a whole lot of work on your own, which is a great use to smaller utilities. And since I'm from the WaterSense program, I can't help but make a shameless plug for my program, which offers partners a multitude of free resources they can customize for their own use, some of which you see on the right side of the screen. But AWE also has great resources, including the little like water bottle, famous water bottle, and their series of postcards that went with that to message on water use. And then the Home Water Works calculator that AWE has is also a great tool that you can share with the public. Next slide. So speaking of water waste, the next thing we're going to talk about is the Water Waste Ordinance, which is a requirement that the utility have some type of water waste ordinance in place. The standard did add a definition for a water waste ordinance, which is considered to be a local statute or a regulation that explicitly prohibits various wasteful uses of water, such as irrigation, water runoff from property, unrepaired leaks, and inefficient practices such as irrigation that occurs on the prohibited day or time, or washing and part services. So it should be enforced. It should have a means for enforcement. It may be a governmental ordinance or regulation or a utility regulation. So it might be done by the city as opposed to utility. And then for wholesale, you can see there's just a requirement that there be provisions. The next slide. Here's an example from the city of Santa Cruz, which is one of the utilities that AWWA assessed. And it's a very extensive regulation, which is responsive to how seriously Santa Cruz treats waterways because of their limited local water supplies. And there's a lot on this slide. We'll see how many of you can speed read through it in the time that I'm spending on it. But I'll just point out that the Santa Cruz regulation addresses unauthorized use of water from fire hydrants, irrigation, which allows excess water to run to waste, and plumbing leaks that have not been addressed within 24 hours of notice of the city. They also don't want you using a hose to wash hardscapes, structures, or vehicles unless the hose is equipped with an auto shut-off valve. Next slide. So, all right, that's the top-level organizational functions. And so now we're going to move into the internal utility actions and requirements. And first up is the old saying that you can't manage what you can't measure, so you meter. The first bullet, we want utilities to be metering. And the first bullet for universal metering is not new, but it is stricter in this new version. The expectation is now that the utility will be fully metered so that everybody is being measured. There are also requirements that we're not just metering the end uses, but we're metering all the sources. And that would include groundwater, surface water, reclaimed water, and metering of all the sources is going to be helpful when we get to the requirements that talk about water loss control as well. Next slide. So we know that people pay attention to things more when they have to pay money for it, and water is no different. So the standard includes requirements related to rate structures. Basically, it comes down to we want to see rates that encourage conservation, not use. A few of the types that can be used are listed here. New to this version is a requirement related to wastewater rates, and they wanted to ensure that those rates would also send a conservation signal, so those are new. But yes, the non-promotional rate structures are really important if you want people to get a signal about their water use in their bill. The next slide. And if we have a rate, there's going to be a bill, and the standard includes requirements related to the frequency and the content of the bills. And it's really important that the consumers can understand the bill, because sometimes a bill will just have a unit. You used 5 units this month. Well, I don't even know what that means. Or maybe the units will be in CCF or HCF or acre feet, and people don't really understand that. So we have requirements that the units of consumption be clearly labeled in gallons or liters. And if you're going to use CCF, please provide a conversion factor so people can figure out what that really means in gallons. I'll just highlight here that our WaterSense Understanding Your Water Bill webpage is regularly either #1 or in the top 5 of the pages people visit on the WaterSense website. And that tells me that people don't really understand their bills. A big change here is in the previous version, the minimum billing frequency was bi-monthly. And we tightened it to monthly for this version of the standard because we really wanted to ensure that customers get regular feedback on their water use. And because sometimes, what the bill is what's going to signify that they've got a leak. And if their bill doesn't come but every other month, there's going to be a lot of water waste before that leak is detected. It's missing its lightning bolt. I forgot to put it there. But another new requirement is the last bullet, which is limiting the number of estimated bills to no more than 2 times a year for our customer. So we want to see, we've got the meters now, so we want to see those meters in use and people being billed for the water that they're actually using, not having it estimated. Next slide. So now to landscapes. Landscapes are important, and we call them out specifically in the standard because outdoor water use is a big issue for many utilities from an overall supply and a peak demand perspective. So the standard includes provisions that get at ensuring more use of water, more efficient use of water outdoors. New to the standard is the provision related to landscape transformation programs. And those should address both landscape design with plant palettes and irrigation systems because both landscape and irrigation influence the water use. And the utility should have a program that includes any or all of the provisions that are listed on the slide. I will note that the AWE Initiative on Landscape Transformation provided some documents and resources that can be very helpful if utilities are looking to develop more active programs than they've had in the past. The next slide. I mentioned water loss earlier, and here it is. Some might ask why we're including water loss. And we thought, well, asking consumers to use less water is undermined when they see water waste on the utility side of the meter. And so you have this picture up on the upper right-hand side, and I don't know if Bill took that picture, but maybe he took it and maybe that water was leaking for about a week before it got fixed, which if you're asking people to save water is sort of annoying to see the water running in the street. So the new version, the old version had water loss control in it. The new version, we reorganized the content a little bit and bolstered it a bit to strengthen the elements associated with water loss control. The utility is asked to have a program that will detect and minimize water loss in the community, and it includes a written plan for reducing real and or apparent losses, and we want them to identify activities to reduce any losses. Next slide. The water loss audit is a really key piece to any such program, and the standard calls for a utility to do an annual audit using the AWWA IWA audit method. A new requirement is that the audit undergo a level 1 water audit validation. Research has shown that the quality of the audits really varies from utility to utility, from year to year, and doing a validation helps to improve the quality. And that's important because the utility is going to take actions that are based on the results of that audit. So they should want to make sure that it's high quality. In the interest of transparency, Standard also asks the utility to make the audit worksheet available to the public on their website. And I can understand where this might cause concern for some, especially if they show that they have a lot of water loss. But really, I think it offers a great opportunity to engage with the public to help them understand the infrastructure that's beneath their feet. They don't see it, so they don't think about it. The work that goes into maintaining it, the need to finance improvements to it, especially if it's aging, and it shows that the utility is taking care of its own business as it's asking the customer to save water on their side of the meter. The next slide. And there are tools to help, like there are tools for the other sections. The AWWA Manual on Water Loss Control Programs, the M36, is a great resource. Very, very thorough document. And the AWWA also has free software to help utilities do the audit. They just released version 6 of the software recently, and it is a really major upgrade. It has, for example, new dashboards that will help you track progress, and you can see in the middle of the screen, that's one of the dashboards that they have available. So if you haven't checked it out, I recommend checking it out. I think it's a really cool tool. The Water Research Foundation did a manual on level 1 validation. Also in a lot of states with their forming water loss programs are coming up lots of good resources and trained validators who can also help in validation. The AWWA site that's listed at the bottom is a good one to bookmark if you want to keep up to date on water loss. And I'll just remind everybody here that the AWWA North American Water Loss Conference, which happens every 2 years, is scheduled this year for December 7th through the 9th in Austin, Texas. Registration, I think, is open, and I would really recommend it. It's a great conference if you are new to the subject, or even if you're experienced and want to learn more about what people are doing around the country. The next slide. So for external policies, there are requirements to advance water efficient codes and standards, hopefully by participating in those local codes and standards developments or advocating for them. And that can include standards for including more water efficient plumbing fixtures or landscapes. New to this version of the standard is a provision to look to integrate water efficiency into land use planning. And the goal for this is to really get ahead of calls for new water supplies to meet the needs of new development by making sure that any new development is water efficient from the start, because it's really going to be easier to build in the savings from the start than trying to fix it after it's built and you don't have it and it's a big problem. And I will say that I think land use planners are increasingly receptive to working with water utilities. There is a growing interest in connecting them at the regional and the local levels. And just a few weeks ago, I attended the American Water Resources Association conference on connecting land and water for healthy communities, which had a lot of really great content. The Alliance for Water Efficiency's Net Blue initiative speaks to this and can be helpful. And AWE also just released a paper that looked at how water utility planning requirements intersect with land use policy and planning in every state by looking through the legal, the laws associated in the state. So you can check the AWE website for that paper. You can go to the next slide. So I did not include a slide for wholesale requirements, but basically the standard identifies sections where a wholesaler should be directly implementing some of the activities. And that would include things like drought planning and public education. This slide really talks about the documentation and reporting, and it describes the type of information that you can use to demonstrate that you have met the different requirements within the standard. And this is a list of some of the material that would be pulled together and submitted to AWE, for example, as they are seeking assessment, as they assess for the purposes of validation. Next slide. So again, for those of you who might have used version 1.0, this is a reminder of the major changes in version 2.0. I did notice a typo in number 2, bullet number 2. That should be section 4.3.4.4, not 3.4. But you'll find it. It's a short document if you buy it, so it's not like you're not going to be able to find it. And that is version 2.0. I feel like I did not really talk fast. I was trying to not talk fast, but I still think I got done quicker than maybe Bill thought I would get done with it. Peter mentioned the standard was developed under the process overseen by the American National Standards Institute. And like he said, the ANSI standards do require the standards undergo review and possible revision every 5 years. So we will begin probably within a year to start to review the standard. And Peter showed you the list of folks who were on that standard committee, and hopefully, I don't know if you were able to tell, but there is a balance. There are requirements for balance on the standards committee. So people who have a management interest like Bill and I, people with a consulting background, services background like Peter, and the utility user members like Mike Buettner, who the current chair, they really need that balance of all the different groups of people who might be interested in the standard. So if you're interested in participating in the future G480, please let any of us know. And then for another bit of history, Peter gave you some of the history, but when we completed that first standard, there was like this moment of, okay, now that's great. Like, so now what do we do with it? We had a standard, but like, how can we encourage people to use it? Because it is voluntary. And if somebody was to use it, like, was there anybody who could like grade their work and tell them like how they did? There wasn't anybody. Was there any way for them to get recognition? There was nothing. And like you said, AWWA didn't really have like an answer for us. There was no real driver that we could see to get folks to pick it up and actually do it. And that is where AWWA stepped into the breach. So I'm now going to turn it over to Bill to describe the origin story of Leaderboard when AWWA stepped forward to help get people using the G480 standard and improving their water conservation program. So Bill, take it away.
All right, thank you, Veronica and Peter, for your presentations. That was just an awesome overview of the standard and the recent updates, so thank you for that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of AWW's G480 verification process and the leaderboard. So back in 2014, when the AWWA G480 standard was new, AWE decided that creating a leaderboard would be a great way to promote the standard and bring more attention to it. And this would also allow AWE to provide much deserved recognition to its members for their great work. And it has been a success. So back in 2014, we officially announced this at the Water Smart Innovations Conference. If you were there, you may remember that. And then we officially launched the leaderboard in 2015. And over there to the right on the slide is a relic from the past. That's AWW's old website, and that's a screenshot of our newsletter when we announced the leaderboard. And Cobb County, Georgia was the first on the board, and I want to thank them for being the first to submit and kind of let us figure out our process for assessing utilities for this, and also the creation of the leaderboard. So from 2015 through 2020, we've had 16 water providers added to the leaderboard. So we can go to the next slide, please, where we can take a look at the various water providers that made it on to the G480-13 leaderboard, or version 1 of the G480. And we have 7 platinum, 4 gold, 3 silver, and 2 wholesale. We added the exemplary wholesaler category in late 2020. So that was a really cool and recent addition that we were excited about. And we will continue to offer that in the other categories moving forward. And while we're on this slide, I want to say that being on the leaderboard, no matter what level of recognition, no matter what category, it represents a great achievement. And it also represents the presence of an outstanding water conservation program. Next slide, please. So, Veronica just went through all the changes that were made, and they were significant enough to warrant a new leaderboard for the updated standard. And also, as time goes by, it's good to re-verify. So we decided to enshrine the accomplishments of those 16 water providers that made it onto the leaderboard on the G480 13 Legacy Leaderboard. So this is the page where that is housed, and we will continue to have that on the AWWA website. So that did not go away, but we do have a new G480 20 leaderboard that we'll hear about here in a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. And I just wanted to say also that, recognition for compliance with the G480 standard, or with the AWWA G480 standard via AWW's verification it's kind of a big deal when a utility gets verified and added to the leaderboard, and it gets picked up by the media from time to time. And so AWWE has provided quotes for news articles, and AWWE has also presented certificates at board meetings and city council meetings. We also will present certificates at our annual meeting that occurs at Water Smart Innovations every year in October. So it gets some great attention and provides deserved recognition, as I mentioned. So here we see a few examples where G480 verification has been in the news. And so with that, we can go to the next slide, and I will hand it off to Brad Spilka.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, in these next few slides, we are going to go over AWW's changes in regard to the new standard and how to get your utility AWW verified under the new G480-20 standard. All right, let's go to the next slide. So first, we did a major update on our G480-20 standard and the AWWA leaderboard page on our website. To get to the page, simply scroll to resources, which is highlighted in green up there, and this page should be one of the first options. So right off the bat on the top of the page, AWW summarized the main aspects of the G480-20 standard. As you can see here, just a little overview and some bullets going over the key points. Next slide. On the bottom of the page, right below that, under the member-only benefits section of the website, we have our AWWA Leaderboard. As you can see, we are still waiting on our first G480-20 submission. If you need any incentive, the first member verified on our leaderboard will get a shout out in our weekly newsletter or something along those lines. So you might want to be the first. Anyway, we also worked with a graphic designer to update our medals so they look better than ever on our website and when you receive your certificate. Next slide. Here on this slide is the old compliance checklist that AWWA used to verify the G480-13, but with the new standard coming out, we thought it was the perfect time to modernize our compliance checklist. As you can see, it was on a Word document. It was a little clunky, but for this one, we definitely updated a bit. Next slide. So here's the new checklist. We updated it to be both more user-friendly by cleaning up the Excel boxes and clarifying the language on the instructions, which are under the requirements and instructions for documentation area. As you go down, we tried to just parse the language so that we're really clear in what we're looking for. Next, we broke down the part that you as the utility will fill out into two distinct sections, which is a major change from last time. First, we have a section where you describe how the requirement was met. That is on that middle section saying describe how the requirement was met, where you provide a summary based on the columns to the left. And then right after that, on the right, we have a section solely for the purpose of providing links, citations, and details. So when submitting, we ask utilities for as much detail as possible in this section, such as documents, page numbers, paragraph, web page, page number, anywhere where we can go right to that portion on your website or in your documents and find how you have satisfied that particular portion of the standard. The more detail you provide us, the quicker and easier it is for us to go through your submission and verify you correctly. Next slide. Next, we have the AWWA Scoring Rubric. These are the general guidelines for how we score your submission and how your compliance level is determined. We have 4 different types of levels. We have Platinum for 100% compliance, Gold, missing completion of 1 sub-area requirement with progress made everywhere. Silver, missing completion of 2 sub-areas or 1 major sub-area that's deemed significant, again with progress made everywhere. And then the third, which doesn't apply to most of our submissions, is the exemplary wholesaler, which is signifying that this wholesale water agency has achieved all applicable sections of the G480 since they're kind of under slightly different rules. Next slide. So how does this process all work? Well, here we have the full process outlined right on this slide. So to be AWWA G480-20 verified, first you have to be an AWWA member. The very first step that you will see on our compliance checklist is that you have to provide proof of purchase for the AWWA G480-20 water guide. They'll just buy the book. It's cheaper for members. I don't remember the price. And you can then you can request the checklist via AWWA's G480-20 webpage, as many of you have already done. You can go onto the previously shown website page and go and hit the button to request it, which is an email form to AWWA, and we'll swiftly get the checklist back for you to use. Simply fill out this checklist and submit thoroughly with all citations. After that, we'll review it, and AWWA may respond with some questions or have some comments on to clarify some of your submissions if you know, what you did, what didn't exactly fill the criteria, or something wasn't met, or you may have missed something by accident. So we will respond with some feedback. And then we will notify members of findings, and we will not finalize their announce until members have cleared and accepted our findings. So one final note is that, like we just said, AWWA will not announce the findings without agreement and consent. For example, for the AWWA G480-13 verification, AWWA offered a member a gold level on the leaderboard. However, the utility chose to wait until they could make a change that ultimately resulted in them being listed as platinum. And we feel that this is a great example of how the G480 standard and the AWWA leaderboard can really help to make a big impact in the field itself. And overall, we really look forward to adding AWWA's first member and many others to the G480-20 leaderboard. We're all set up, ready to go, and very excited to receive some submissions. And now I will turn it back over to AWWA President Ron Burke for some closing remarks.
All right, thank you, Brad, Bill, Veronica, and Peter. Thank you all for joining us. And this is a great time to dive into any questions you may have. I'm going to actually ask Liam to facilitate this part of this portion of the presentation, but you can also email any questions to Liam. You see his email address here if you have some questions you'd rather us tackle later and not during this presentation. A PDF and link for the webinar recording will be available in a few days. We'll send you some information about that soon. Obviously, stay tuned for information on additional AWWA webinars on the horizon. And we'd love to connect with you. If you're not already a member, again, please consider becoming one, but you can also sign up on our website to receive regular updates on water efficiency news and events. So Liam, do we have any questions?
All right, thanks, Ron. Yep, we've got a couple questions coming in. First, if we purchase water from a provider, do we report on their supply conservation plans?
This is Bill with AWWA. I can take that one. Generally, you wouldn't be responsible for a wholesaler. If you're a retail provider and you purchase wholesale water and you're filling out the checklist, you're not necessarily beholden to their activity levels. However, you could highlight that in your checklist, but we wouldn't necessarily like dock you points or prevent you from checking a box yes in the standard based on the wholesaler's activities.
All right, thanks, Bill. Next question, do wholesale agencies only need to meet the requirements in 4.5 of the checklist plus purchase the G480-20 publication?
That is generally true, yes. So yeah, to do this whole process, you do have to submit proof that you've purchased the standard. And then we do ask wholesalers to go through the entire checklist we supply you with. And anytime something's applicable to a wholesaler, we ask that you document whether or not you comply with that portion of the standard. But there is a section at the end of the checklist that's specific to wholesalers.
All right. Question about if we already received G480-13 recognition, do we need to submit a full checklist again or just the new portions?
That is a great question, and we would like you to go through the whole checklist. You know, there were some major revisions that Veronica went over and included. There's also some subtle changes to the wording on some of the requirements. And like I said in a slide earlier, it is nice to re-verify as time goes on. So we do want to make sure anyone added to the G480-20 leaderboard is, you know, current with their activities. So we do ask that you fill out the full checklist.
All right, and kind of along those lines, someone's asking if we were platinum before and no longer qualify for platinum, then do we get a new certificate?
Yes, we will issue a new certificate to anyone, even if, let's say, you were platinum before and you are platinum again, which is what we'll hope for. We will give you a new certificate because the standard changed, and we will specify that it's the G480-20 standard. These are great questions, by the way, everyone.
All right, someone's wondering if cubic meters are considered a valid unit of measurement for billing instead of gallons or liters.
Hi, this is Peter. No, I'm sorry. Nobody really thinks in cubic meters. A cubic meter is a vast quantity of water, and at the customer level, which is really what this relates to. But the goal is to try to communicate in a volume that human beings could relate to.
All right, thank you, Peter. That looks like all we have for questions at the moment. I don't know if we want to give folks another couple minutes to. Oh, here's one more that just came in. So a question about how to purchase the manual, whether it's through AWWE or somewhere else.
That is through AWWA, and we included at the top of the slide deck the page where you can find that. And we'll make sure before we send the slides out in PDF form that slide includes a link. But if you Google search or whatever your search engine is, look up AWWA G480 Standard, you'll be able to find that page, and you can purchase it through AWWA. We also have a link on our website to the AWWA website, so you can purchase that.
All right, a couple more questions trickling in here. Could you expand on the requirement for volumetric sewer rates and the rationale behind that?
Sure. This is Peter. So the rationale for including volumetric sewer rates is that in many cases, for many water providers, the sewer component of the bill, especially in the East Coast, we're seeing, is making up 50% of the volumetric component, or in some cases more. It's actually higher than the water aspect. And so if that bill is not volumetric, then there is not really a volumetric price signal necessarily the same way. So our desire was to ensure that there is a volumetric price signal on the bill, and that's why we thought it was important to include wastewater. Now, there is understanding that in many providers do not control the wastewater bill, and so I think that would be a fair exception. If it's not your utility, you might be able to suggest that this is not something within your purview for applying to AWWA. I don't know how they handle that sort of situation. But that was our thinking, is that it's essential to provide as much of a volumetric measure as possible. Now, we also understand with wastewater, it's typically estimated through a winter consumption approach, which is not always perfect and not always perfect in different climates. So there could be adjustments there or different approaches. That's certainly an area that we're going to keep a close eye on, and we're looking for feedback for the future editions. So I appreciate the question very much.
All right, that's all we have for questions at the moment. So if anyone thinks of anything after the webinar, as it says on the slide, feel free to reach out to me and we can direct your question to the appropriate speaker.
Right. Well, hey, Liam, thank you so much. It looks like we're going to be able to wrap up a little bit early today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you especially to our presenters. And we hope this was helpful. We hope to see your submission, your application coming in soon. And again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to email Liam That's Liam at A4WE.org. Be sure to check out the Alliance for Water Efficiency website to learn more about what's happening across the water efficiency spectrum. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Keep an eye out for information about that. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up now. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.